In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a stolen silver teapot, a shattered window, and a cryptic note, the truth lies beneath the silence, pull Miss Jane Marple into a web of secrets. When a charming painter, Lawrence Redding, arrives. At the Grange, strange events unfold, a hidden portrait, love letters from a tragic past, and a buried diamond spark a dangerous game. As a gunshot echoes in the churchyard, Miss Marple unravels a decade-old mystery of love, betrayal, and greed, proving that even in the quietest villages, the deepest truths simmer beneath the surface, waiting to be poured out like tea from a cup. Chapter 1. The Quiet of St. Mary Mead, the serene village of St. Mary Mead, where the days unfolded with the gentle predictability of a well-worn prayer book. Miss Jane Marple sat in her drawing room, her knitting needles moving with the soft, rhythmic precision of a metronome. The autumn sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, casting intricate patterns of shadow and light across the polished oak floorboards. Her teacup, a delicate piece of Wedgwood, adorned with pale roses, rested on the small mahogany table beside her, its contents cooling as a faint wisp of steam curled upward. The room was a haven of quiet order, its shelves lined with books, its mantelpiece adorned with a single porcelain figurine of a shepherdess, and its air infused with the faint scent of lavender from a bowl of dried petals. Yet, for all its tranquility, Miss Marple's sharp blue eyes, framed by spectacles that rested lightly on her nose, were alert, scanning the world beyond her window with the keenness of a hawk. St. Mary Mead was not a place given to upheaval. Its rhythms were as familiar as the church bells that tolled each Sunday, summoning villagers to the stone edifice of St. Mary's with its ivy-clad tower. The high street, lined with cottages whose gardens bloomed with chrysanthemums and late roses, buzzed with the gentle hum of daily life. The baker's boy cycling with a basket of fresh loaves, the postman exchanging pleasantries with Mrs. Price at the general store, and the children scampering home from school, their laughter echoing across the green. Yet, in the past week, Miss Marple had detected a subtle discord in this symphony of routine. It was nothing overt, no scandal had erupted, no crime had been reported, but the village seemed to hold its breath, as if awaiting the fall of an unseen shoe. Her first inkling of disturbance came from Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, whose usually cheerful demeanour had been replaced by a distracted air. Miss Marple had observed her hurrying down the lane toward the vicarage, her hat slightly askew, her hands clutching a shawl as if to ward off more than the autumn chill. Then there was young Dr. Haydock, whose motor car is sleek, modern contraption that seemed out of place among the village's cobblestones, had been seen parked at the Grange, the grand but weathered estate owned by Colonel Bantry's cousin, Mrs. Eleanor Bantry. The Grange, with its sprawling lawns and ivy-covered walls, had long been a fixture of St. Mary Mead, its faded elegance a testament to a bygone era of wealth. Mrs. Bantry, a widow of 60 with a penchant for lively conversation, rarely entertained visitors, yet Dr. Haydock's presence suggested something amiss. Miss Marple's thoughts were interrupted by the soft chime of the clock on the mantel, signalling 4 o'clock. She set her knitting aside, a half-finished shawl in soft grey woolen, rose to prepare another pot of tea. As she measured the leaves into the teapot, her mind wandered to the Women's Institute meeting she had attended the previous evening. There, amid the clatter of teacups and the hum of gossip, she had caught fragments of conversation that piqued her interest. The primary topic was the arrival of a stranger at the Grange, Mr. Lawrence Redding, a painter of some repute from London, who had taken up residence as Mrs. Bantry's guest. His presence had stirred the village. not least because it coincided with a series of peculiar incidents. A silver teapot, an heirloom of Mrs. Bantry's, had vanished from the Grangers' dining room. A window in the estate's library had been found shattered, with no explanation. And, most intriguingly, a cryptic note had been discovered in the church's alms box. It scrawled words reading, "The truth lies beneath the silence." The note, in particular, had set tongues wagging. Mrs. Price, ever eager to embellish a tale, had suggested it was the work of a prankster, perhaps one of the village youths. Mr. Polk, the constable, had dismissed it as nonsense, though Miss Marple noted the unease in his eyes as he spoke. Mrs. Clement, however, had been visibly shaken, clutching the note as if it were a summons to judgment. Miss Marple, seated quietly at the edge of the meeting, had said little, her serene smile masking the rapid calculations of her mind. She knew better than to dismiss such anomalies. In her long experience, villagers like St. Mary Mead were much of human nature, their calm surfaces often concealing currents of ambition, envy, or fear. A note, a missing teapot, a broken window, these were not isolated events, but threads in a tapestry she had yet to fully discern as she poured her tea. The doorbell chimed, a soft, melodic sound that echoed through the cottage. Miss Marple smoothed her skirt and opened the door to find Dolly Bantry, Mrs. Eleanor Bantry's niece, standing on the threshold. Dolly was a lively young woman of 25, with auburn hair and a penchant for dramatic gestures. Today, however, her usual vivacity was tempered by a furrowed brow. "Miss Marple," Dolly said, stepping inside, "I'm so glad you're home. Aunt Eleanor sent me. She's in a state about that wretched teapot, and now there's this business with Mr. Redding. She insists you come to tea tomorrow. She says you're the only one with a sensible head in the village." Miss Marple smiled, gesturing for Dolly to sit. "Dear me," she said, her voice gentle but laced with curiosity. "What has Mr. Redding done to cause such a stir?" Dolly perched on the edge of the sofa, her hands twisting the hem of her scarf. "It's not what he's done, exactly, or at least, we don't know what he's done. But Aunt Eleanor says he's been acting oddly. He's charming enough, all smiles and compliments. But he's been poking about the Grange at all hours, asking questions about the house's history. And then there's Clara, the maid. She swears she saw him near the church at midnight last week, though he claims he was in bed." Miss Marple poured a cup of tea for Dolly, her movements deliberate. "And the teapot?" she prompted, her eyes meeting Dolly's over the rim of her spectacles. "Gone without a trace," Dolly exclaimed. "It's solid silver, engraved with Rose's grandmam's pride and joy. Aunt Eleanor's convinced it's been stolen, but Mr. Redding says it's probably just misplaced." Misplaced? As if a teapot could wander off on its own. Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing the details. A missing heirloom, a stranger's nocturnal wanderings, a cryptic note. These were pieces of a puzzle, each one distinct yet potentially connected. She recalled a similar incident years ago in St. Mary Mead, when a visiting curate had been linked to a series of petty thefts. His pious demeanor masking a penchant for pilfering people, she reflected, were rarely what they seemed. Like teacups, they could appear fragile and unremarkable, yet hold secrets that scalded when revealed. "Tell your aunt I shall be delighted to join her for tea," Miss Marple said, her tone as mild as ever. "And do tell me, Dolly, what is Mr. Redding like? I've heard he's an artist." Dolly brightened, eager to share. "Oh, he's terribly handsome, tall, with dark hair and those piercing eyes that seem to see right through you. He paints portraits, mostly of society people. Says he's come to St. Mary Mead for inspiration, though I can't imagine what inspiration he expects to find here. He's charming, but there's something, I don't know, guarded about him. Aunt Eleanor thinks he's hiding something. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression thoughtful. Artists, she said, often see the world differently. But it's curious, don't you think, that he should choose St. Mary Mead for inspiration? We are not exactly Paris or Florence. Dolly laughed, but her laughter was tinged with unease. That's what I said, but he insists it's the quiet that draws him. He says silence reveals more than noise ever could. Miss Marple's eyes flickered with interest, though her face remained serene. Silence, she thought, was indeed a canvas for revelation. She recalled the note in the alms box. The truth lies beneath the silence. Was it coincidence, or had Mr. Redding's words unwittingly echoed a deeper truth? After Dolly left, promising to relay Miss Marple's acceptance, the elderly spinster returned to her knitting. The needles clicked steadily, a counterpoint to the thoughts weaving through her mind. She considered the Grange, its history steeped in the Bantry family's fortunes and misfortunes. Mrs. Eleanor Bantry was a kind soul, if prone to exaggeration, but her home had seen its share of dramas, a contested will, a wayward son who had vanished to the colonies, and now this enigmatic painter. Miss Marple wondered what Mr. Redding sought in the Grange's shadowed halls. Was it merely inspiration, or something more tangible? The next morning, Miss Marple took her customary walk through the village, her black umbrella shielding her from the light drizzle that had settled over St. Mary Mead. She paused at the church, its ancient stones glistening with rain, and stepped inside to escape the damp. The interior was cool and dim, the stained glass windows casting muted colors across the pews. She approached the alms box, a sturdy oak structure bolted to the wall, and examined it closely. The lock was intact, the wood unmarked, suggesting the note had been slipped in during a moment of inattention. She wondered who had access to the church at odd hours. Mrs. Clement, certainly, and the verger, Mr. Hawes, but also anyone bold enough to enter under cover of darkness. As she left the church, she encountered Mr. Polk, the constable, who tipped his hat respectfully. "Morning, Miss Marple," he said, his tone hearty but strained. "Heard about the goings-on at the Grange, I suppose?" Miss Marple inclined her head. "A little," she said. "The teapot, and now this note in the alms box. Most curious." Mr. Pork shifted uncomfortably. "Aye, it's queer, all right. I reckon it's just village nonsense, but Mrs. Bantry's in a right tizzy. Says she wants me to question that Redding fellow, but I've no cause to, not yet." "Quite right," Miss Marple said, her voice soothing. "One mustn't jump to conclusions, but it might be wise to keep an eye on things, don't you think? Strangers, however charming, can sometimes bring unexpected complications." Mr. Pock nodded, though his expression suggested he found her caution overly cautious. Miss Marple smiled and continued her walk, her mind turning to the painter. She knew the type, men of charm and talent, whose polished exteriors often concealed restless hearts. In her youth, she had known a young man, a poet, whose honeyed words had masked a penchant for deceit. Mr. Redding, she suspected, was cut from similar cloth, though the nature of his secrets remained unclear. That afternoon, Miss Marple arrived at the Grange, her black handbag clutched in one hand, her umbrella in the other. The estate loomed before her, its stone facade softened by ivy but marred by peeling paint and cracked cornices. Mrs. Eleanor Bantry greeted her at the door, her round face flushed with excitement. "Jane, you're a godsend," she declared, ushering her into the drawing room. "This business with the teapot has me positively unhinged. And now Clara's been telling tales about Mr. Redding says she saw him digging in the garden at midnight. Can you imagine?" Miss Marple settled into a chintz-covered armchair, accepting a cup of tea from a slightly flustered Clara. "Digging, you say?" she asked, her tone mild. "How extraordinary. And what does Mr. Redding say to that?" Mrs. Bantry waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, he laughs it off, says Clara must have been dreaming. But I'm not so sure. He's been asking all sorts of questions about the Grange, about my late husband's collection of silver, about the family history. It's unsettling." Before Miss Marple could respond, the door opened, and Mr. Lawrence Redding entered. He was indeed handsome, as Dolly had described, with dark hair swept back from a high forehead and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His smile was warm, but Miss Marple noted the slight tightening of his jaw as he greeted her. "Miss Marple, a pleasure," he said, his voice smooth as polished wood. "Mrs. Bantry has been singing your praises. She says you're the village's resident sage." Miss Marple chuckled, her eyes twinkling. "Hardly that, Mr. Redding. I'm merely an old woman who enjoys a quiet life and a good cup of tea." "Understand you're an artist." "Indeed," he said, settling into a chair. "Portraits, mostly. I find the human face endlessly fascinating. Every line tells a story. And what story brings you to St. Mary Mead?" Miss Marple asked, her tone deceptively casual. Redding's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "The story of silence," he said, recovering quickly. "London is all noise and clamour. Here, in the quiet, I can hear the world breathe." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes never leaving his face. She noted the way his fingers tightened around his saucer, the slight tremor in his hand as he set it down. He was nervous, she thought, though he hid it well. She steered the conversation to lighter topics, the weather, the church fate, but her mind was elsewhere, piecing together the fragments of the village's uneased. As the afternoon wore on, Mrs. Bantry regaled them with tales of the Granger history, from its days as a bustling estate to its current state of genteel decay. Mr. Redding listened politely, but Miss Marple observed how his eyes darted to the windows, as if expecting to see someone outside. When Clara entered to clear the tea things, he flinched almost imperceptibly, a reaction that did not escape Miss Marple's notice. After tea, Mrs. Bantry insisted on showing Miss Marple the library, where the broken window had been temporarily boarded up. "It's the oddest thing," she said, gesturing to the splintered frame. "No one heard a thing, and there's no sign of what caused it. Just glass all over the floor." Miss Marple examined the window, her fingers tracing the edge of the board. The break was clean, suggesting a deliberate act rather than an accident. She glanced at the bookshelves, their volumes dusty but intact, and noted a faint scuff mark on the floor near the desk. Someone, she thought, had been searching for something. As they returned to the drawing room, Miss Marple's thoughts were interrupted by a commotion outside. Clara burst in, her face pale. "Ma'am, it's the strangest thing," she gasped. "I was cleaning Mr. Redding's room, and I found a box locked, hidden under the floorboards. I didn't touch it, but I thought you should know." Mrs. Bantry's eyes widened. "A box under the floorboards. Mr. Redding, what is the meaning of this?" Redding, who had followed them from the library, looked momentarily startled, but recovered his composure. "I'm sure it's nothing," he said, his voice calm but strained. "Perhaps an old keepsake left by a previous tenant. I'll have a look at it." Miss Marple said nothing, but her mind was racing. A locked box, a missing teapot, a broken window, a cryptic note. These were not random occurrences, but clues to a larger mystery. She recalled a case from her youth, when a hidden compartment in a country house had revealed a cache of stolen jewels. The parallels were striking, though she sensed this affair was more complex, its roots perhaps stretching beyond St. Mary Mead. As she took her leave, promising to return the next day, Miss Marple cast a final glance at Mr. Redding. He stood by the fireplace, his expression unreadable. But she saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand lingered near his pocket. Whatever he was hiding, she thought, it was buried deep, like the truth beneath the silence of a teacup. That evening, back in her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire. Her knitting resumed, but her thoughts far from the grey wool in her hands. She considered the note in the alms box, its words echoing in her mind. "The truth lies beneath the silence." It was a phrase that suggested concealment, perhaps even danger. She thought of Mr. Redding's guarded demeanour, of Clara's tale, of midnight digging, of the locked box hidden beneath the floorboards. Each detail was a piece of the puzzle, and Miss Marple knew that, with patience, she would see the pattern emerge. She rose to make another pot of tea, her movements slow and deliberate. As the kettle hummed, she gazed at her Wedgwood teacup, its delicate roses gleaming in the firelight. It was a simple object, yet it held the warmth of countless moments, the stories of countless hands. Like St. Mary Mead, it seemed unremarkable, yet beneath its surface lay the potential for revelation. Miss Marple smiled, her eyes bright with anticipation. The village might be quiet, but its silence was speaking, and she was listening. Chapter 2. The Guest at the Grange. The Grange stood at the edge of St. Mary Mead like a sentinel of a bygone era, its stone walls weathered by time and its tall chimneys piercing the autumn sky. Ivy clung tenaciously to its facade, softening the cracks in the masonry but failing to disguise the air of gentle decay that hung about the place. The lawns, once meticulously tended, were now patchy, with dandelions creeping into the flower beds, and the gravel drive bore the scars of neglect, its stones scattered by years of rain and neglect. Yet, despite its faded grandeur, the Grange retained an imposing presence, its tall windows reflecting the last rays of the setting sun as Miss Jane Marple approached, her black umbrella tucked under her arm and her sensible shoes crunching softly. On the path, Mrs. Eleanor Bantry had invited Miss Marple for tea, a summons delivered with such urgency by young Dolly Bantry that it had piqued the elderly spinster's curiosity. The events of the past few days, the missing silver teapot, the shattered library window, the cryptic note in the church alms box, and now the discovery of a locked box beneath Mr. Redding's floorboards, had stirred the village into a quiet frenzy, though none dared voice their suspicions too loudly. Miss Marple, with her knack for seeing beneath the surface of village life, sensed that the arrival of Mr. Lawrence Redding, the London painter, was no mere coincidence. As she stepped into the Grange's cavernous hall, its polished wood floors echoing faintly underfoot, she prepared to observe the man who had set St. Mary Mead abuzz. Mrs. Bantry greeted her with characteristic warmth, her round face flushed with a mixture of excitement and exasperation. "Jane, you're a saint for coming," she declared, ushering Miss Marple into the drawing-room. The room was a study in faded opulence. Heavy velvet curtains framed the windows, their deep green hue dulled by time. A grand piano stood in one corner, its keys untouched for years. and a collection of silver-framed photographs adorned the mantel, capturing the Bantry family in happier, wealthier days. A fire crackled in the grate, casting a warm glow over the chintz armchairs and the low table set for tea. The wet teapot, not the missing heirloom, but a serviceable substitute, stood at the center, flanked by delicate cups and a plate of scones. "I'm at my wit's end," Mrs. Personally said, sinking into a chair and gesturing for Miss Marple to sit. First the teapot, then that wretched window, and now Clara's tales about hidden boxes. "I swear, Jane, I'm beginning to think the Grange is cursed." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes twinkling behind her spectacles. "Curses are rather rare." "In St. Mary Mead, Eleanor," she said gently, "but mysteries, I find, are not. Tell me, what do you make of your guest, Mr. Redding?" Before Mrs. Bantry could reply, the door opened, and Mr. Lawrence Redding entered. He was, as Dolly had described, a striking figure, tall and lean, with dark hair swept back from a high forehead and eyes that held a restless intensity. His suit, though well cut, bore the faintest signs of wear at the cuffs, suggesting a man whose fortunes were not as grand as his manner implied. He carried himself with the easy grace of one accustomed to society, yet there was a wariness in his posture, as if he were perpetually braced for an unseen challenge. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth and warm, "Mrs. Bantry has told me so much about you. It's a pleasure to meet the village's most discerning resident." Miss Marple inclined her head, her smile polite but probing. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Redding. I understand you're an artist, a portrait painter, I believe." "Indeed," he said, settling into a chair with a fluid motion. "I find the human face a fascinating subject. Every line, every shadow, tells a story of its own." Mrs. Bantry, pouring tea with a slightly unsteady hand, seized the opportunity to vent her frustrations. "What I'd like to know," she said, "is the story behind my teapot. It's the strangest thing, Jane. Solid silver, engraved with roses. My grandmother's pride and joy gone without a trace. And Mr. Redding here thinks it's been misplaced, as if a teapot could simply wander off." Redding's smile was tight, his fingers tightening briefly around the saucer he held. "I only meant, Mrs. Bantry, that such things are often found in the most unexpected places. A servant might have moved it, or it could be tucked away in a cupboard." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes never leaving Redding's face. She noted the faint flush that crept up his neck, the way his gaze flickered toward the window as if seeking escape. "An interesting theory," she said mildly. "But silver teapots are rather heavy to misplace, are they not? And then there's the matter of the broken window. Most curious." Mrs. Bantry nodded vigorously. "Exactly. No one heard a thing, and there's no sign of what caused it. Just glass all over the library floor. And now Clara's found this box under Mr. Redding's. Floorboards locked, mind you. I'm beginning to wonder what sort of guest I've invited into my home." Redding's expression remained composed, but Miss Marple caught the brief tightening of his jaw. "I assure you, Mrs. Bantry," he said, "I know nothing about any box. If Clara found something, it's likely a relic from a previous occupant. The Grange is an old house, full of secrets." "Secrets indeed," Miss Marple murmured, her tone so soft it might have been mistaken for agreement. She set her teacup down, her movements deliberate, and turned the conversation to lighter matters. "Tell me, Mr. Redding, what brings an artist of your caliber to St. Mary Mead? We are, after all, a quiet village, far from the galleries of London." Redding leaned back, his smile returning but not quite reaching his eyes. That's precisely the appeal, Miss Marple. London is all noise and distraction. Here, in the stillness, I find clarity. The countryside has a way of stripping away pretense, don't you think? Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene but her mind alert. His words echoed the note in the alms box. The truth lies beneath the silence, and she wondered if the similarity was deliberate or a trick of her imagination. She recalled a young man in St. Mary Mead years ago, a charming violinist who had spoken poetically of beauty while secretly forging checks. Charm, she knew, could be a mask. And Mr. Redding's was polished to perfection as the tea progressed. Mrs. Bantry recounted the history of the Grange, her voice animated as she described its glory days under her late husband's stewardship. Redding listened with apparent interest, but Miss Marple noted how his eyes roamed the room, lingering on the silver candlesticks, the heavy oak panelling, the portraits of stern-faced Bantrys glaring down from the walls. When Clara entered to replenish the scones, Redding's gaze followed her, and Miss Marple saw a flicker of unease in his expression. Clara, for her part, avoided his eyes, her hands trembling slightly as she set the plate down. After tea, Mrs. Bantry insisted on showing Miss Marple the library, where the broken window remained boarded up. The room was vast, its high ceilings adorned with faded plasterwork, and its shelves lined with leather-bound volumes that smelled of dust and time. The boarded window cast a shadow across the floor, and Miss Marple bent to examine it, her fingers brushing the splintered frame. The glass had been shattered from the outside, she noted. The shards scattered inward, a detail that suggested intent rather than accident. Near the desk, she saw the scuff mark she had noticed the previous day, now joined by a faint smear of mud, as if someone had returned to the scene. Most peculiar, Miss Marple said, straightening. Have you had the window repaired yet? Eleanor, not yet. Mrs. Bantry sighed. The glazier's coming tomorrow. But I can't help feeling it's all connected. The teapot, the window, that wretched box. What do you make of it, Jane? Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. I think, she said, that the Grange has more stories to tell than we realize. But stories, like teacups, require careful handling to reveal their contents. As they returned to the drawing room, the conversation turned to the locked box. Mrs. Bantry, her curiosity overcoming her indignation, had summoned Clara to describe her discovery. The maid, a slight girl with nervous eyes, stood twisting her apron as she spoke. It was under the floorboards in Mr. Redding's room, ma'am, she said. I was sweeping, and I noticed a board was loose. I lifted it, and there it was. Small box, all carved and locked tight. I didn't touch it, I swear. Reading, who had rejoined them, laughed lightly. Clara, you've been reading too many novels. It's probably just an old keepsake. I'll have a look at it later, if Mrs. Bantry permits. Mrs. Bantry frowned. I'd rather Constable Pock have a look first. No offence, Mr. Redding, but I don't like mysteries in my own house. Miss Marple observed Redding closely, noting the brief flash of alarm in his eyes before he masked it with a smile. Of course, he said smoothly, I've nothing to hide. As Miss Marple took her leave, promising to return the next day, she paused in the hall to adjust her hat. The mirror reflected Redding standing by the drawing-room door, his expression unreadable but his hands clenched at his sides. She stepped into the cool evening air, her mind racing. The locked box, she thought, was no mere keepsake. Its concealment suggested purpose, and Redding's reaction suggested fear. She recalled a case from her youth, when a hidden diary had revealed a blackmail scheme in a neighbouring village. The parallels were striking, though she sensed this mystery was deeper, its roots perhaps tangled in Redding's past. That evening, Miss Marple sat by her fire, her knitting idle as she sipped her tea. The Wedgwood teacup gleamed in the firelight, its roses a delicate contrast to the dark thoughts swirling in her mind. She considered the note in the alms box, its words a haunting refrain. The truth lies beneath the silence. Redding's talk of clarity and stillness, Clara's tale of midnight digging, the locked box. The missing teapot pointed to a secret carefully guarded. Miss Marple knew that secrets, like tea leaves, settled at the bottom, waiting to be stirred. And she, with her quiet persistence, would stir them. Chapter 3. The Vicar's Unease. The Vicarage of St. Mary Mead. A modest red brick house, nestled beside the ancient stone of St. Mary's Church, stood as a beacon of quiet piety in the village's heart. Its garden, though small, was a riot of late autumn colour chrysanthemums in shades of amber and crimson, their blooms defiant against the encroaching chill. The air carried the faint tang of wood smoke, mingling with the earthy scent of fallen leaves, as Miss Jane Marple approached the vicarage gate, her black umbrella tucked neatly under her arm. Her visit was ostensibly to discuss the upcoming church fete, a task she had volunteered for at the Women's Institute. But her true purpose lay in the subtle undercurrents of unease that had rippled through the village since Mr. Lawrence Redding's arrival at the Grange. The missing silver teapot, the shattered library window, the cryptic note in the alms box, and now the locked box beneath Redding's floorboards. These were not mere coincidences, Miss Marple knew, but threads in a tapestry of human motives, waiting to be unravelled. Mrs. Leonard Clement, the vicar's wife, greeted Miss Marple at the door, her usually bright demeanour shadowed by a pallor that spoke of sleepless nights. Her dark hair, pinned neatly under a simple cap, framed a face that bore the strain of worry, and her hands, clutching a small vase of wilted roses, trembled slightly as she ushered Miss Marple inside. The vicarage parlour was cosy but unpretentious, its walls adorned with faded watercolours and a single photograph of a young woman with striking features, her smile tinged with melancholy. Miss Marple recognized the face at once. It was Margaret, Mrs. Clement's late sister, whose tragic death in London a decade earlier had left a quiet scar on the vicarage's warmth. "Jane, how good of you to come," Mrs. Clement said, her voice striving for cheer but faltering. "I'm afraid I'm behind on the fete preparations. Would you like tea?" Miss Marple smiled, settling into a worn armchair by the fire. "Tea would be lovely, Griselda," she said, using Mrs. Clement's Christian name with the familiarity of long acquaintance. "But I sense you're troubled. Is it the fete or something else?" Mrs. Clement hesitated, her hands busy with the teapot, as if to delay her response. The tea service was simple, its cups mismatched but clean, a far cry from the grandeur of the Grange. As she poured, a faint clatter betrayed her nerves. "It's that note," she confessed at last, setting the teapot down. "The one in the alms box. The truth lies beneath the silence. It's so ... ominous. I can't shake the feeling it means something dreadful." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes gentle but piercing. "It is an unusual phrase," she agreed. "Have you any idea who might have written it?" Mrs. Clement shook her head, her fingers twisting the edge of her apron. "None. The box is locked, and only Leonard and Mr. Hawes, the verger, have keys. But anyone could slip a note through the slot, I suppose. It's just, well, it's unsettling, especially with all this talk about Mr. Redding and the goings-on." At the Grange, Miss Marple sipped her tea, its warmth a contrast to the chill of her thoughts. She recalled the Women's Institute meeting, where Mrs. Clement's distress had been palpable as she clutched the note, her eyes darting nervously to the door. Now, in the quiet of the vicarage, Miss Marple sensed an opportunity to probe deeper. "I understand Clara, Mrs. Bantry's maid, has been sharing tales," she said, her tone light but deliberate. "Something about Mr. Redding and the church." Mrs. Clement's face tightened, and she glanced toward the window, as if expecting to see the painter himself lurking in the garden. "Clara's a good girl, but she's prone to nerves," she said. "She told me she saw Mr. Redding near the church late at night, last Tuesday, I think. He was standing by the yew tree, just ... watching. She said he looked like he was waiting for someone. When she passed by, he slipped into the shadows." Miss Marple's knitting, which she had brought as a matter of habit, lay idle in her lap, her needles silent. "How curious," she said. "And did Clara hear anything? Voices, perhaps?" Mrs. Clement hesitated, then leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. She didn't want to say at first she was afraid of causing trouble, but she admitted she overheard Mr. Redding speaking to someone, though she couldn't see who. It was dark, and she was hurrying home. She caught only a few words: teapot and payment. She thought it sounded like an argument. Miss Marple's eyes flickered with interest, though her expression remained serene. "Payment," she repeated softly. "An intriguing word. And this was near the church, you say?" "Yes, by the graveyard," Mrs. Clement said, shivering slightly. "It's given me the creeps, Jane. Leonard says I'm being fanciful. But with that note, and now this box Clara found under Mr. Redding's floorboards, I can't help feeling something's terribly wrong." Miss Marple set her teacup down, her movements precise. "It does seem a trifle unusual," she said. "But villages, you know, are full of small dramas. I recall a time when old Mrs. Finch, the postmistress, was convinced her lodger was smuggling contraband. It turned out to be nothing more than a collection of rare coins he'd inherited. Still, it's wise to be observant." Mrs. Clement managed a weak smile, but her eyes remained troubled. "You're right, of course, but I wish Leonard would take it more seriously. He's so busy with his sermons, he barely notices what's happening under his nose." Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to the vicar, a kind but absent-minded man whose devotion to theology often left practical matters to his wife. She considered the alms box, its sturdy oak and iron lock, a symbol of trust in the village's sanctity. The note's presence suggested a violation of that trust, and Redding's nocturnal presence by the church hinted at a purpose beyond mere inspiration. She recalled a similar incident in St. Mary Mead years ago, when a visiting scholar had used the church as a rendezvous for illicit dealings, his scholarly demeanor a perfect disguise. People, she mused, were like the pages of a book, unremarkable until turned, revealing secrets in the margins. As the conversation turned to the fete, Miss Marple steered it gently back to Mr. Redding. "He's an artist, I understand," she said. "Portraits, Mrs. Bantry tells me. Has he mentioned his work to you?" Mrs. Clement shook her head. "Not much. He came to the vicarage once to ask about the church's history, something about the stained glass windows inspiring his sketches. But he seemed ... distracted, kept glancing at that photograph of Margaret." She gestured to the picture on the wall, her voice catching. "It's silly, but it made me uneasy. Margaret's been gone 10 years, yet he looked at her as if he knew her." Miss Marple's gaze followed Mrs. Clement's, settling on the photograph. Margaret's face, with its high cheekbones and wistful smile, was indeed striking. Her death, Miss Marple recalled, had been a tragedy of fire in a London boarding house, the cause never fully determined. Rumours had swirled of a scandal, a wealthy employer, a broken heart, but the village had closed ranks around the Clements, and the matter had faded into memory. Now, with Redding's arrival, those whispers seemed to stir anew. Did Mr. Redding say anything about the photograph? Miss Marple asked, her tone as mild as the autumn breeze. No, Mrs. Clement said, but he stared at it for the longest time. I thought perhaps he was admiring the frame, its silver. You know, a gift from my father. But it was her face he was looking at, I'm sure of it. Miss Marple nodded, filing the detail away. A painter, she thought, might be drawn to a face. But Redding's interest seemed more than artistic. She recalled his reaction at the Grange, the fleeting alarm in his eyes when the locked box was mentioned. Was it possible he had known Margaret? Or was his interest tied to the teapot, the note, the box pieces of a puzzle that pointed to a past he wished to keep buried? As she rose to leave, promising to finalize the fate roster, Miss Marple paused by the photograph, her fingers brushing. The frame, she was lovely, she said softly. It's a comfort to have her memory here. Mrs. Clement's eyes glistened. Yes, she said, though sometimes I wonder if her story ended too soon for us to know it fully. Outside, the drizzle had ceased, leaving the air crisp and clear. Miss Marple walked slowly toward the village. Green, her mind weaving the threads of the morning's revelations. The note in the alms box, with its cryptic promise of truth beneath silence. Clara's tale of Redding's midnight argument, with its mention of teapot and payment. The locked box, hidden with care. And now Redding's interest in Margaret's photograph. These were not random notes, but a melody of suspicion, its rhythm growing clearer with each step. She paused by the church, its tower casting a long shadow across the graveyard. The yew tree, where Clara had seen Redding, stood sentinel over ancient graves, its branches heavy with age. Miss Marple approached it, her eyes scanning the ground for signs of disturbance. The earth was soft from the rain, and she noted a faint indentation near the tree's roots, as if someone had stood there recently, perhaps digging or concealing something. She thought of the teapot, still missing, and wondered if it, too, held a secret beyond its silver sheen. As she turned toward home, Miss Marple's thoughts returned to Margaret. The young woman's death had been a tragedy, but tragedies, she knew, often left echoes, debts unpaid, promises broken, secrets buried. Redding's presence in St. Mary Mead, his guarded charm, his nocturnal wanderings, suggested he was more than a painter seeking inspiration. He was, perhaps, a man running from a past that had caught up with him. Its shadow cast across the quiet of the village, back in her cottage. Miss Marple settled by the fire, her Wedgwood teacup cradled in her hands. The roses on its surface seemed to glow in the firelight, a delicate reminder of the beauty and fragility of truth. She thought of Mrs. Clement's unease, of Redding's restless eyes, of the note's haunting words, the silence of St. Mary. Mead was not empty, she knew, but filled with whispers of the past, waiting for someone to listen. And Miss Marple, with her quiet persistence, was listening intently. Chapter 4. The locked box. The morning mist hung low over St. Mary Mead, cloaking the village in a gauzy veil that softened the edges of its thatched cottages and ancient oaks. Miss Jane Marple, undeterred by the damp, made her way along the high street, her black umbrella serving as both shield and staff. Her destination was the Grange, where the discovery of the locked box beneath Mr. Lawrence Redding's floorboards had set the villagers' tongues wagging with renewed vigor. The missing silver teapot, the shattered library window, the cryptic note in the alms box. And now this hidden box, these were not mere ripples in the villagers' calm, but waves. Miss Marple thought, stirred by a hand yet unseen. Her steps were measured, her mind alert, as she considered the threads of suspicion that wove through St. Mary Mead, each one leading back to the enigmatic painter who had so unsettled Mrs. Eleanor Bantry's household. The Grange loomed ahead, its stone facade ghostly in the mist, its tall windows reflecting the muted light of the overcast sky. Miss Marple was expected, having received an urgent summons from Mrs. Bantry the previous evening. The note, delivered by a breathless Dolly Bantry, had been brief but insistent. The locked box was to be opened under the supervision of Constable Pock, and Mrs. Bantry wanted Miss Marple's sensible head present for the occasion. As she entered the hall, its polished wood floors echoing faintly, Miss Marple noted the air of tension that clung to the house like damp to the walls. Clara the maid hovered near the staircase, her eyes wide with apprehension, while Mrs. Bantry bustled forward, her face a mixture of excitement and unease. "Jane, thank heaven you're here," Mrs. Bantry exclaimed, her voice carrying through the cavernous hall. "This business with the box has me positively rattled. Constable Poke's in the library with Mr. Redding, and they're about to open it. I can't imagine what's inside, but I'm certain it's nothing good." Miss Marple smiled, her expression serene but her eyes sharp. "Let us not anticipate, Eleanor," she said gently. "A box, like a teacup, may hold more than it seems, but we shall see soon enough." The library, with its boarded-up window and shelves of dusty tomes, was a sombre setting for the morning's drama. Constable Poke, a stout man with a perpetually furrowed brow, stood by the desk, his hands clasped behind his back as if to assert authority over the proceedings. Mr. Redding, impeccably dressed but with a faint pallor betraying his composure, leaned against a bookcase, his arms crossed. Clara lingered near the door, twisting her apron, while Dolly Bantry hovered nearby, her auburn hair catching the dim light from a single lamp. The locked box, small and ornate, sat on the desk like an accusation, its carved surface gleaming with the patina of age. Its lock, intricate and modern, suggested a purpose beyond mere decoration. Constable Pock cleared his throat, his voice gruff. "Right then, Mrs. Bantry's given permission to open this, seeing as it was found on her property. Mr. Redding, you've no objection?" Redding's smile was tight, his eyes flickering to the box. "None at all, Constable. I've said before, it's likely some old trinket left by a previous tenant. I know nothing about it." Miss Marple, seated in a backed chair, observed Reading closely. His voice was smooth, but she noted the slight tremor in his hand as he adjusted his cuff, the way his gaze darted to the door as if calculating an escape. She recalled a similar moment years ago in St. Mary Mead, when a young man, caught pilfering from a neighbor's attic, had worn the same mask of nonchalance. People, she thought, betrayed themselves in the smallest gestures. Constable Pock produced a small tool, a lockpick, borrowed from the village blacksmith, and set to work. The room was silent, save for the faint click of metal and the crackle of the fire in the grate. Mrs. Bantry fidgeted, her fingers twisting a lace handkerchief, while Clara's breathing was audible, quick and shallow. After a moment, the lock yielded with a soft snap, and Poke lifted the lid. The room seemed to hold its breath as he reached inside and withdrew a single item, a miniature portrait. no larger than a postcard, framed in tarnished silver. It depicted a young woman, her face delicate yet striking, with high cheekbones and eyes that held a quiet intensity. Mrs. Bantry gasped, leaning forward. Good heavens, who is she? It's exquisite, but why hide it under the floorboards? Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her expression remained calm. She recognized the face at once. It bore an uncanny resemblance to the photograph in the vicarage of Mrs. Clement's late sister, Margaret. The portrait was the work of a skilled hand, its brushstrokes capturing the subtle play of light on the woman's skin, the faint sadness in her smile. Miss Marple leaned closer, her eyes tracing the delicate lines. The resemblance was not exact. The portrait's subject had darker hair, perhaps, and a different tilt to the mouth, but the echo was unmistakable. Constable Pock turned the portrait over, revealing a faded inscription on the back, to L.R., in memory of lost days. The initials sent a ripple through Miss Marple's thoughts. L.R. Lawrence reading. She glanced at the painter, whose face had grown ashen, though he quickly masked it with a cough. I've never seen it before, Redding said, his voice steady but his eyes avoiding the portrait. As I said, it must belong to the house. The Grange is full of such relics. Mrs. Bantry's eyes narrowed. Relics don't hide themselves under floorboards, Mr. Redding, and that lock is new, hardly the work of some long-forgotten tenant. What do you know about this? Redding spread his hands, his smile strained. Nothing, I assure you. I'm as puzzled as you are. Miss Marple said nothing, but her mind was racing. The portrait's resemblance to Margaret, the initials, Redding's unease, these were pieces of a puzzle, each one sharp-edged and precise. She recalled Mrs. Clement's words about Redding's interest in Margaret's photograph, his lingering gaze in the vicarage parlour. Was the portrait a keepsake, a clue, or something more dangerous? She thought of the note in the alms box, "The truth lies beneath the silence," and wondered if the portrait was the truth, or merely a shadow of it. Constable Pock, clearly, out of his depth, pocketed the portrait with a grumble. I'll take this for now, he said. Might be evidence, might be nothing, but I'll have a word with the vicar about that note too. This is getting queerer by the minute. As the group dispersed, Miss Marple lingered, her eyes scanning the library. The scuff mark near the desk, the smear of mud she had noted before, were still there, untouched. She bent to examine them, her fingers brushing the floor. The mud was fresh, suggesting someone had been in the room recently, perhaps after the window was broken. She straightened, her thoughts turning to Clara's tale of Redding's midnight argument near the church. The words teapot and payment echoing in her mind. The teapot, she suspected, was more than a stolen heirloom. It was a symbol, perhaps, of something hidden, like the portrait in the locked box. That afternoon, Miss Marple paid a call on her old friend, Sir Henry a retired Scotland Yard commissioner who was staying at the Blue Boar Inn during a brief visit to St. Mary Mead. Over tea in the inn's cosy parlour, she shared the morning's events, her voice soft but precise. The portrait is the key, she said, her eyes bright behind her spectacles. But to what lock, I wonder? It resembles Mrs. Clement's sister, Margaret, who died in that fire in London. And Mr. Redding's reaction, he knows more than he's saying. Sir Henry, a shrewd man with a penchant for mysteries, leaned forward, his tea forgotten. Margaret, you say, I remember that case vaguely a tragedy, but there were rumours of foul play. The fire was ruled accidental, but some thought it was set to cover something up. Do you think Redding was involved? Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked. Softly, a counterpoint to her thoughts. "I think," she said, "that Mr. Redding is a man with a past, and that past has followed him to St. Mary Mead. The portrait, the teapot, the note, they're all connected. I'm sure of it. But the connection lies in what he's hiding, not what he's showing." Sir Henry nodded, his eyes gleaming with interest. "I'll make some inquiries about Redding discreetly, of course. Scotland Yard might have something on him, or on this Margaret business. In the meantime, Jane, you'll keep your eyes open." Miss Marple smiled, her expression as mild as the tea in her cup. "My eyes, Sir Henry, are always open." As she walked home through the mist, the village quiet save for the distant bark of a dog, Miss Marple's thoughts returned to the portrait. Its delicate beauty, its hidden resting place, its cryptic inscription pointed to a story that had begun long before Redding's arrival. She recalled a case from her youth, when a hidden locket had revealed a forbidden romance, its discovery shattering a family's facade. The portrait, she suspected, was a similar key, unlocking not just a secret, but a motive. Back in her cottage, Miss Marple settled by the fire, her Wedgwood teacup cradled in her hands. The roses on its surface seemed to whisper of secrets, their delicate petals, a reminder of the fragility of truth. The locked box had been opened, but its contents had only deepened the mystery. Redding's past, Margaret's death, the teapot's disappearance, these were threads in a tapestry that was still unfolding, its pattern hidden beneath the silence of St. Mary Mead, and Miss Marple, with her quiet persistence, was determined to trace it to its end. Chapter 5. A shadow from the past. The late afternoon light filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns across the polished oak floor as she sat by her fire, her knitting needles idle in her lap. The Wedgwood teacup on the table beside her gleamed softly, its rose-painted surface a quiet reminder of the village's deceptive calm. St. Mary Mead, with its orderly gardens and predictable routines, seemed to slumber under the weight of autumn, yet beneath its surface Miss Marple sensed a gathering storm. The events at the Grange, the missing silver teapot, the shattered library window, the cryptic note in the alms box, and the miniature portrait found in the locked box beneath Mr. Lawrence. Redding's floorboards had stirred the village into a quiet frenzy, each clue pointing to a mystery that grew darker with every revelation. The portrait, with its haunting resemblance to Margaret, Mrs. Clement's late sister, had struck a particular chord, and Miss Marple's mind, sharp as the needles she held, was weaving a pattern from the threads of suspicion. Her visit to the vicarage had confirmed her suspicions about Redding's interest in Margaret's photograph, and the portrait's discovery had deepened the puzzle. The inscription on its back to L.R., in memory of lost days, suggested a connection to the painter, yet his denial had been swift, his composure strained. Miss Marple, with her keen understanding of human nature, knew that such denials often masked truths too painful or dangerous to admit. She recalled a case from her youth, when a hidden letter had revealed a betrayal that shattered a village. Family, the portrait, she suspected, was a similar relic, its delicate brushstrokes concealing a story that stretched beyond St. Mary Mead's quiet borders. Determined to trace the thread further, Miss Marple resolved to visit the village library, a small, musty building tucked behind the post office. Its shelves, though modest, held a collection of old newspapers and parish records, a treasure trove for anyone seeking the whispers of the past. As she stepped out into the crisp morning air, her black umbrella shielding her from a light drizzle, she noted the village's subdued mood. The baker's boy cycled past, his basket empty, and Mrs. Price, sweeping the steps of the general store, offered a curt nod rather than her usual chatter. Even the church bells, tolling for morning service, seemed to carry a note of unease. The library was quiet, save for the soft rustle of pages as Miss Weatherby, the librarian, sorted through a stack of books. A spinster of indeterminate age, with a penchant for cataloguing and a memory for village gossip, Miss Weatherby greeted Miss Marple with a smile. "Good morning, Jane," she said, adjusting her spectacles. "Looking for something in particular, or just browsing?" "A bit of both," Miss Marple replied, her tone mild. "I thought I might look through some old newspapers, London ones, from about 10 years ago. I'm curious about a certain event." Miss Weatherby's eyes gleamed with interest. 10 years ago, you say? That would be around the time of poor Margaret Clement's death. Tragic business, that fire. I can fetch the papers for you. Of them are from the Times and the Daily Telegraph. Miss Marple nodded, settling at a table as Miss Weatherby bustled to the back room. The library smelled of aged paper and wax polish, a comforting contrast to the chill outside. When Miss Weatherby returned with a bundle of yellowed newspapers, Miss Marple set to work, her fingers deftly turning the brittle pages. She scanned the headlines from 1915, her eyes searching for mentions of the fire that had claimed Margaret's life. After an hour, she found it a small article in the Times, dated April 3rd, 1915, tucked between reports of the war and society gossip. The article was brief but illuminating. Margaret Clement, a governess aged 24, had perished in a fire at a boarding house in Bloomsbury. The blaze, attributed to a faulty gas lamp, had consumed the upper floors, leaving little evidence. Margaret's employer, a financier named Mr. Arthur Grayson, had been questioned but cleared of suspicion, though whispers of scandal had followed. The article noted Grayson's patronage of the arts, mentioning a young painter, Lawrence Reading, who had recently completed his portrait. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. Reading, then a rising star in London's art circles, had known Margaret, or at least known of her. The connection was no coincidence. She turned to another article, this one from the Daily Telegraph, which hinted at more. Grayson, it seemed, had been a man of wealth and influence, but his reputation was not unblemished. There were vague references to financial irregularities and a troubled association with his governess, though details were scarce. The fire, the article suggested, had conveniently silenced questions about Grayson's affairs. Miss Marple leaned back, her mind racing. Margaret's death, Reading's presence, the portrait's inscription, these were not isolated events, but links in a chain, forged in a past that refused to stay buried. As she left the library, thanking Miss Weatherby for her help, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Clara, the Granger's maid, whose nervous tales had added fuel to the mystery. Clara's mention of Reading's midnight argument near the church, with its cryptic references to teapot and payment, suggested a transaction gone awry. Miss Marple resolved to speak with the girl, knowing that servants often saw what their employers missed. She found Clara in the village square, carrying a basket of laundry, her face pale and her eyes darting nervously. "Good morning, Clara," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle but firm. "Might I have a word?" Clara started, nearly dropping her basket. "Oh, Miss Marple, I didn't see you there. I'm just on my way back to the Grange." "No hurry," Miss Marple said, falling into step beside her. "I wanted to ask about what you overheard near the church. You mentioned Mr. Reading speaking of a teapot and payment. Can you recall anything else?" Clara's cheeks flushed, and she glanced around, as if fearing eavesdroppers. "I shouldn't have said anything," she whispered. "Mrs. Bantry told me to keep quiet, but... It was so odd. I was coming back from my aunt's, past the church, and I heard voices, Mr. Redding and someone else, a man, I think. They were arguing, low, but I caught a bit. Mr. Redding said something about Margaret's secret and keeping it buried. Then he mentioned the teapot, like it was important, and the other man said, 'You'll get your payment when it's done.' I didn't stay to hear more. I was scared." Miss Marple patted Clara's arm, her touch reassuring. "You did right to tell me, Clara. It's often the smallest things that matter most." "Did you recognize the other voice?" Clara shook her head. "No, miss. It was too dark, and I didn't want to be seen. But it wasn't anyone from the village, I'm sure. The voice was ... posh, like Mr. Redding's, but harder." Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing the details. Margaret's secret, a buried truth, a payment. The words echoed the note in the alms box. Its cryptic promise of truth beneath silence. She thanked Clara and sent her on her way, her thoughts turning to Redding's past. The newspaper articles had confirmed his connection to Grayson, and Clara's story suggested a link to Margaret's death. But what was the teapot's role? A silver heirloom, yes, but perhaps also a vessel for something more, a clue, a keepsake, a secret. That evening, Miss Marple sat by her fire, her knitting resumed, but her thoughts far from the grey wool in her hands. She considered the portrait, its delicate beauty, a stark contrast to the darkness it implied. Margaret's death, Grayson's wealth, Redding's art, these were pieces of a puzzle that stretched from London's smoky streets to the quiet lanes of St. Mary Mead. She recalled a similar case. Years ago, when a hidden brooch had revealed a theft disguised as a tragedy. The portrait, she suspected, was a similar key, its brushstrokes hiding a truth that Redding feared to face. As she sipped her tea, the Wedgwood teacup warm in her hands, Miss Marple's eyes lingered on its roses, their petals a delicate mask for the cup's fragile strength. The silence of St. Mary Mead was not empty, she knew, but filled with echoes of the past. Margaret's smile, Redding's unease, the note's haunting words. The shadow of that past had fallen across the village, and Miss Marple, with her quiet persistence, was determined to bring it into the light. Chapter 6. The Teapot's Tales. The dawn broke over St. Mary Mead with a hesitant glow, the sun struggling through a veil of clouds that draped the village in a muted light. Miss Jane Marple, ever an early riser, stood at her cottage window, her gaze fixed on the garden where dew clung to the last of the autumn roses. Her Wedgwood teacup, cradled in her hands, steamed gently, its rose-painted surface a quiet companion to her thoughts. The village, with its orderly cottages and predictable rhythms, seemed to hold its breath, as if aware of the secrets stirring beneath its calm. The missing silver teapot, the shattered library window, the cryptic note in the alms box, the miniature portrait resembling Margaret Clement, and the locked box hidden beneath Mr. Lawrence Redding's floorboards. These were not mere incidents, but clues, Miss Marple knew, to a mystery rooted in a past that refused to stay silent. The discovery of the portrait, with its haunting inscription to L.R. in memory of lost days, had deepened the enigma, linking Reading to Margaret's tragic death in a London fire a decade earlier. Clara's tale of Redding's midnight argument near the church, with its mention of Margaret's secret and payment, had added a darker hue, suggesting a transaction tied to the missing teapot. Miss Marple's visit to the village, Library had confirmed Redding's connection to Arthur Grayson, Margaret's former employer, a financier whose wealth was shadowed by rumors of scandal. The pieces were falling into place, yet the pattern remained elusive, like a melody heard but not fully grasped. That morning, news reached Miss Marple via Dolly Bantry, who arrived at the cottage, breathless and wide-eyed. "Jane, you won't believe it," she exclaimed, barely pausing to remove her scarf. "The teapot's been found. In the churchyard, of all places, half buried near old Mrs. Hartley's gravestone. And there's Marine's side. It was a bundle of letters, wrapped in cloth. Constable Polk's got them now, but Aunt Eleanor's in a state, insisting you come to the Grange at once." Miss Marple's eyes brightened, though her expression remained serene. "Letters, you say?" she murmured, setting her teacup down. "How very curious. I shall come directly, Dolly. But tell me, was Mr. Redding present when the teapot was found?" Dolly shook her head. "No, he was out sketching, or so he said. But Clara swears she saw him near the churchyard 2 nights ago, poking about the graves. It's all so queer, Jane." Miss Marple nodded, her mind already tracing the implications. The teapot, an heirloom of silver and sentiment, had been more than a stolen object. It was a vessel, she suspected, for secrets too heavy to carry openly. She gathered her shawl and umbrella, her steps brisk as she followed Dolly to the Grange, where the air of tension had thickened into something almost tangible. The Grange's drawing room was a scene of barely contained chaos. Mrs. Eleanor Bantry paced before the fire, her face flushed with indignation, while Constable Polk stood by the table, the silver teapot gleaming incongruously amid a clutter of teacups and scones. The bundle of letters, tied with a faded ribbon, lay beside it, their edges yellowed but intact. Mr. Redding, summoned from his sketching, stood near the window, his hands in his pockets, his expression a careful mask of detachment. Clara hovered by the door, her apron twisted in her hands, while Dolly perched on the sofa, her eyes darting between the teapot and Redding. "Jane, thank heavens!" Mrs. Bantry exclaimed, seizing Miss Marple's arm. "This is beyond belief. That teapot, my grandmother's pride and joy, found in the churchyard like some common rubbish, and these letters, whoever hid them must be mad." Miss Marple settled into a chair, her eyes scanning the room. "May I see the letters, Constable?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. Polk, looking relieved to share the burden, handed her the bundle. "Found them inside the teapot, wrapped tight," he said. "Haven't read them all yet, but they're old. 10 years, maybe. Addressed to someone unnamed, signed by a Margaret." Miss Marple's pulse quickened, though her hands remained steady as she untied the ribbon. The letters, written in a delicate, feminine hand, were love letters, their tone ardent but tinged with desperation. They spoke of a forbidden romance, a man of wealth and influence, and a treasure hidden in silence. One passage, in particular, caught her eye. "My heart is yours, but the weight of our secret grows heavier each day. The treasure must remain buried, lest it destroy us both." The signature was unmistakable, Margaret Clement. Mrs. Bantry, peering over Miss Marple's shoulder, gasped. Margaret, Griselda's sister. But how did her letters end up in my teapot, buried in the churchyard? Reading, his voice calm but strained, spoke from the window. "It's a mystery, certainly. Perhaps they were hidden long ago, before I ever came to St. Mary Mead. The churchyard's an odd place for a teapot, I grant you, but old houses have their secrets." Miss Marple's eyes met his, and she noted the faint sheen of perspiration on his brow. Indeed they do, she said softly. But secrets have a way of surfacing, Mr. Redding. Like tea leaves in a cup, they settle until stirred. Constable Pock, frowning at the letters, scratched his head. This is all very well, but what's it got to do with the teapot being stolen, and that portrait we found yesterday? It's too much coincidence for my liking. Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. The letters confirmed Margaret's connection to a man of influence, likely Arthur Grayson, the financier mentioned in the newspaper articles. The treasure hidden in silence echoed the note in the alms box, suggesting a secret worth concealing, perhaps worth stealing a teapot to protect. She recalled Clara's story of Redding's argument, the words Margaret's secret and payment lingering in her thoughts. Was the teapot a decoy, a hiding place, or something more? She turned to Clara, who stood trembling by the door. Clara, you mentioned seeing Mr. Redding near the churchyard. Can you recall anything else about that night? Any detail, however small? Clara's eyes widened, and she glanced nervously at Redding. I don't know, Miss. It was dark, and I was scared. But I think I saw him with a shovel near Mrs. Hartley's grave. I didn't stay to watch. Redding's laugh was sharp, almost brittle. A shovel? Clara, you've a vivid imagination. I was sketching the church by moonlight, hardly a crime. Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. Sketching by moonlight is most poetic, Mr. Redding, but a shovel is rather less so. Perhaps you were inspired by the gravestones. Redding's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, his silence louder than any protest. Mrs. Bantry, exasperated, threw up her hands. This is intolerable. First my teapot, then a box, now letters. What next? I want answers, Constable. Poke, looking increasingly out of his depth, promised to investigate further. As the group dispersed, Miss Marple lingered, her eyes on the teapot. Its silver surface, engraved with roses, gleamed in the firelight, a silent witness to the secrets it had held. She noted a faint scratch near the spout, as if it had been pried open, suggesting haste or desperation. The letters, she thought, were not the teapot's only secret. There was something more, something Redding feared to reveal. That afternoon, Miss Marple returned to her cottage, her mind turning over the morning's revelations. She sat by the fire, her knitting resumed, but her thoughts far from the grey wool in her hands. The letters, with their talk of a treasure hidden in silence, pointed to a secret Margaret had guarded, perhaps at the cost of her life. Redding's connection to Grayson, confirmed by the newspaper articles, suggested he had been more than a painter in Grayson's circle, perhaps a confidant, perhaps a pawn. The teapot's burial in the churchyard, so near the place where Clara had overheard Redding's argument, was no accident. It was a deliberate act, meant to conceal or protect. She recalled a case from her youth, when a stolen locket, buried in a garden, had held the key to a blackmail scheme. The teapot, she suspected, was a similar vessel, its silver walls guarding a truth that Redding and, perhaps another, wished to keep buried. The note in the alms box, with its cryptic promise, seemed to taunt her. The truth lies beneath. The silence. Was the teapot the silence, or merely its container? As evening fell, Miss Marple sipped her tea, the Wedgwood teacup warm in her hands. Its roses, delicate yet enduring, seemed to whisper of the secrets hidden in plain sight. The teapot's tale was not yet fully told, she knew, but its discovery had stirred the waters of St. Mary Mead, revealing glimpses of a past that cast long shadows. Redding's guarded demeanour, Clara's nervous tales, Margaret's letters all pointed to a truth that lay just beneath the surface, waiting for Miss Marple's quiet persistence to bring it to light. Chapter 7. The Night Visitor. The moon hung low over St. Mary Mead, its pale light casting long shadows across the village's quiet lanes, where the cottages slept under thatched roofs and the air carried the faint scent of wood smoke. Miss Jane Marple sat by her drawing-room window, her knitting needles still, her Wedgwood teacup resting untouched on the table beside her. The fire in the grate crackled softly, its glow illuminating the delicate roses on the teacup's surface, but her attention was fixed on the darkness beyond the lace curtains. The events of the past days, the missing silver teapot, the shattered library window, the cryptic note in the alms box, the miniature portrait of a woman resembling Margaret Clement, and the love letters hidden within the teapot had woven a web of suspicion around Mr. Lawrence Redding, the painter whose arrival had disrupted the village's calm. Miss Marple, with her keen understanding of human nature, sensed that the threads were tightening, and tonight she felt the pattern might shift. The discovery of the teapot in the churchyard, buried near old Mrs. Hartley's gravestone with Margaret's letters inside, had confirmed Miss Marple's suspicion that it was more than a stolen heirloom. The letters, with their talk of a treasure hidden in silence, hinted at a secret tied to Margaret's death in a London fire a decade earlier. A secret linked to Arthur Grayson, her wealthy employer, and, by extension, to Redding, who had painted Grayson's portrait. Clara's tale of Redding's midnight argument near the church, with its mention of Margaret's secret and payment, suggested a transaction gone awry, perhaps involving the teapot or the portrait found in the locked box. The inscription on the portrait, to Elar, in memory of lost days, pointed to Redding's personal connection to Margaret, a connection he denied but could not conceal from Miss Marple's discerning gaze, her instincts honed by years of observing the small dramas of village life, told her that Redding was a man on edge, his charm a fragile mask for a deeper unease. She recalled a similar case in St. Mary Mead, when a young man, outwardly respectable, had been caught hiding stolen goods in a church crypt, his nocturnal habits betraying his guilt. Redding, she suspected, was driven by a similar compulsion, a need to act, to conceal or retrieve something vital. Tonight, with the village stirred by the teapot's recovery and the letter's revelations, she felt certain he would move. Miss Marple adjusted her shawl, her eyes fixed on the lane leading to the Grange. She had chosen her vantage point carefully, her cottage window offering a clear view of the path Redding would likely take if he ventured toward the churchyard again. Her suspicion was not mere fancy. Clara's account of seeing him with a shovel near Mrs. Hartley's grave, combined with the teapot's burial there, suggested he was guarding or seeking something hidden in that sacred ground. The note in the alms box, "The truth lies beneath," the silence echoed in her mind, its words a riddle that pointed to the churchyard's silent stones. At midnight, the church clock tolled, its chimes resonant in the still air. Miss Marple's patience was rewarded when a figure emerged from the shadows of the Granger's drive, moving swiftly but silently toward the church. It was Redding, unmistakable in his lean silhouette, a dark coat draped over his shoulders and a small bundle in his hand. She noted the absence of a shovel, suggesting his errand was not to dig but perhaps to retrieve or inspect. Slipping into her softest shoes, Miss Marple donned a dark shawl and stepped into the night. Her movements as quiet as a cat's. She kept her distance, her umbrella tucked under her arm, its presence a comfort, though she had no intention of using it as a weapon. The village was asleep, its windows dark, and the only sound was the rustle of leaves underfoot as she followed Redding's path. The churchyard was a maze of shadows, the ancient yew tree looming over gravestones worn smooth by time. Reading paused near Mrs. Hartley's grave, the same spot where the teapot had been found, and knelt, his hands moving quickly as if searching the earth. Miss Marple, concealed behind a crumbling stone angel, watched as he unearthed a small tin, its surface glinting faintly in the moonlight. He opened it, his movements hurried, but before he could examine its contents, a sharp crack split the silence a gunshot, its echo ricocheting through the churchyard. Redding gasped, clutching his shoulder as he fell back, the tin slipping from his grasp. A second figure, cloaked in darkness, darted from behind the yew tree and vanished into the night, their footsteps fading toward the lane. Miss Marple, her heart pounding but her resolve firm, stepped forward, her voice calm but commanding. "Mr. Reading, are you hurt?" Reading, his face pale, struggled to sit up, blood seeping through his fingers as he pressed them to his shoulder. "Miss Marple," he croaked, his eyes wide with shock. "What? How did you know time for that?" she said briskly, kneeling beside him. She tore a strip from her shawl, pressing it to his wound with surprising strength. "We must get you to Dr. Haydock. Can you walk?" He nodded, grimacing, and with her support, staggered to his feet. The tin lay forgotten in the grass, and Miss Marple, ever practical, retrieved it, tucking it into her pocket before guiding Redding toward the village. She knew better than to linger in the churchyard where the shooter might return. Her mind raced, cataloguing the details, the gunshot, the fleeing figure, the tin's significance. The note's words, "The truth lies beneath the silence," seemed to pulse in the air, as if the churchyard itself was speaking. Reaching her cottage, Miss Marple used her neighbour's telephone to summon Constable Pauk and Dr. Haydock, her voice steady despite the hour. Pauk arrived first, his lantern casting stark shadows as he took in Redding's condition. "What's all this then?" he demanded, his eyes narrowing. "Shot in the churchyard." "This is getting out of hand, Miss Marple." Dr. Haydock, arriving shortly after, tended to Redding's wound, pronouncing it superficial but painful. "Bullet grazed the shoulder," he said, bandaging it expertly. "He'll live, but he's in no state to answer questions tonight." Miss Marple, however, had other priorities. She handed the tin to Pauk, her expression grave. "You'll want to open this, Constable," she said. "It was what Mr. Redding was after, I believe." Pauk, with some effort, pried open the tin, revealing a single object, a diamond, flawless and large, its facets catching the lantern's light like a captive star. The room fell silent, save for Redding's laboured breathing. Mrs. Bantry, summoned by the commotion, gasped from the doorway, her nightcap askew. "A diamond in my churchyard. Jane, what does this mean?" Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, though her voice remained soft. "It means, Eleanor, that the silence beneath the teacup is beginning to speak." As Redding was taken to Dr. Haydock's surgery for further care, Miss Marple remained in her cottage, the tin's contents heavy in her thoughts. The diamond, she suspected, was the treasure hidden in silence, mentioned in Margaret's letters. A prize tied to her death and Grayson schemes. Redding's nocturnal errand, his argument overheard by Clara. The portrait's inscription all pointed to a secret he had guarded for a decade, perhaps at great cost. The gunshots suggested another player, someone desperate to keep that secret buried. She recalled a case from her youth, when a stolen gem had sparked a murder in a neighboring village, its brilliance a lure for greed and betrayal. The diamond in the tin, she thought, was no mere jewel but a motive, its value measured not in carats but in lives. As she sipped her tea, the Wedgwood teacup warmed in her hands. Miss Marple's mind traced the threads of the mystery. Margaret's love for a man of influence, Redding's connection to Grayson, the teapot's burial, the portrait's concealment, the note's cryptic warning. The night visitor had acted, but the truth, like the diamond, was now in the open, and Miss Marple, with her quiet persistence, would follow it to its source. Chapter 8. The truth revealed. The morning sun broke through the clouds over St. Mary Mead, casting a tentative warmth across the village's cobblestone lanes and thatched roofs. In the quiet of her cottage, Miss Jane Marple sat by her fire, her Wedgwood teacup cradled in her hands, its rose-painted surface catching the light like a delicate confession. The events of the previous night, the gunshot in the churchyard, Mr. Lawrence Redding's injury, and the discovery of a flawless diamond in the tin he had unearthed, had sent ripples of shock through the village, shattering its fragile calm. The silver teapot, the shattered library window, the cryptic note in the alms box, the miniature portrait resembling Margaret Clement, and the love letters hidden within the teapot had all pointed to a secret buried deep in Redding's past. A secret tied to the tragic death of Mrs. Clement's sister a decade earlier. Now, with the diamond in Constable Polk's custody and reading under Dr. Haydock's care, Miss Marple knew the time had come to unravel the threads of this mystery, to lay bare the truth beneath the silence. The village buzzed with whispers. As Miss Marple made her way to Dr. Haydock's modest surgery, a converted cottage at the edge of the green, her black umbrella, though unnecessary in the clear light, was tucked under her arm, a habit as much as a prop. The surgery's waiting room was empty save for Mrs. Bantry, who had arrived early, her face a mixture of indignation and curiosity. "Jane, this is madness," she exclaimed, her voice echoing in the small space. "A diamond in the churchyard, readying shot. I swear, the Grange will never recover from this scandal." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes gentle but sharp. "Scandals, Eleanor, are often the surface of deeper truths. Let us see what Mr. Redding has to say." Dr. Haydock ushered them into a small room where Redding lay propped on a cot, his shoulder bandaged and his face pale but composed. Constable Polk stood by the window, his notebook open, while Sir Henry Clithering, Miss Marple's friend from Scotland Yard, leaned against the wall, his keen eyes missing nothing. The diamond, now locked in Polk's evidence box, seemed to cast a metaphorical shadow over the room, its presence a silent accusation. Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting bag at her side, though she made no move to open it. "Mr. Redding," she began, her voice soft but commanding, "you've had a trying night, but I believe you owe us an explanation. The teapot, the portrait, the letters, the diamond, they all point to a story you've kept hidden. Will you tell it, or shall we guess?" Redding's eyes, shadowed with pain, met hers, and for a moment the mask of charm slipped, revealing a weariness that spoke of years of burden. "You're a perceptive woman, Miss Marple," he said, his voice low. "I suppose there's no use denying it now. The diamond, it's the key to everything." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene. "Then let us start with Margaret Clement," she said. "The portrait we found, inscribed to L.R., was of her, was it not? And the letters, hidden in the teapot, were hers, written to a man of influence, Arthur Grayson, I presume." Redding's jaw tightened, but he nodded, Yes, Margaret was. A light in a dark world. I met her in London when I was painting Grayson's portrait. She was his governess, but more than that, she was his obsession. He promised her everything: wealth, love, a future, but it was a lie. Grayson was a man who used people, and Margaret was no exception. Miss Marple's eyes never left his face, noting the flicker of remorse in his gaze. "And the diamond?" she prompted. Redding sighed, his shoulders slumping. It was stolen, a heist Grayson orchestrated, using his connections to cover it. Margaret, poor soul, was drawn into it unwittingly. She thought she was carrying a gift for Grayson's sister, but it was the diamond hidden in a parcel. When she realized the truth, she was terrified. She confided in me, begged me to help her return it, but Grayson found out. Sir Henry leaned forward, his voice sharp. "The fire in Bloomsbury, was that Grayson's doing?" Redding nodded, his voice breaking. "I believe so. He couldn't risk Margaret exposing him. The fire was ruled an accident, but I knew better. I was too late to save her, but I kept the diamond, hid it in the teapot, a keepsake from her, a reminder of my failure. I buried it in St. Mary Mead years ago, when I visited the Grange as a young man. I thought it was safe, forgotten." Miss Marple's knitting needles, now in her hands, clicked softly, a counterpoint to her thoughts. "But it wasn't forgotten," she said. "Someone knew someone who followed you here, who shot at you last night." Redding's eyes darkened. "Grayson, he's alive, living under an alias, Mr. Harrow, a recluse in a cottage near Danimouth. He tracked me here, demanded the diamond. I refused, told him it was gone. He didn't believe me, kept pressing, threatening. That's what Clara overheard in the churchyard, an argument about the diamond, not the teapot. The teapot was just a decoy, a place to hide Margaret's letters when I realized Grayson was closing in." Mrs. Bantry gasped, her hand to her mouth. "Grayson, that dreadful man, and he's been skulking about my village." Miss Marple turned to Sir Henry, her voice calm but urgent. "Sir Henry, I suggest you look into Mr. Harrow's cottage. A man desperate enough to shoot is likely to have left traces, a rifle, perhaps, or papers linking him to the diamond." Sir Henry nodded, already reaching for his coat. "Poke, come with me. We'll have a look at this Harrow fellow." As they left, Miss Marple returned her attention to reading. "The portrait," she said softly, "was a keepsake, wasn't it? A reminder of Margaret and of your guilt." Redding's eyes glistened, and he looked away. "I painted it after her death, from memory. I inscribed it to myself, a foolish gesture. I hid it in the box, thinking it safe. But Grayson's presence stirred everything up. He must have known I was here, must have suspected I'd kept something. From that time," Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind piecing together the final threads. The note in the alms box, "The truth lies beneath the silence," had been Grayson's taunt. She realized, a warning to reading, that his secret was not safe. The teapot, buried with Margaret's letters, had been a desperate attempt to preserve her memory, while the diamond, hidden in the churchyard, was a relic of a crime that had cost her life. Grayson's shot in the dark had been an act of desperation, a final attempt to reclaim what he believed was his. By evening, Sir Henry returned with news. Harrow's cottage, searched under Poke's authority, had yielded a rifle, its barrel still warm, and a cache of papers detailing Grayson's financial dealings, including the diamond heist. Grayson himself, confronted, had confessed, his arrogance crumbling under the weight of evidence. He had tracked reading to St. Mary Mead, believing the painter still held the diamond, and had grown reckless in his pursuit. Reading, his wound tended, faced charges for concealing stolen property, but was spared graver accusations, his remorse evident. As he was taken into custody, he looked at Miss Marple, his voice low. "You saw it all, didn't you?" The truth beneath the silence. Miss Marple's smile was gentle. "People, Mr. Redding, are like teacups. They hold more than they seem. But the truth always spills out in the end." Back in her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting resumed, the Wedgwood teacup gleaming softly. The diamond, the letters, the portrait all had revealed a tale of love, betrayal, and greed, a tale that had begun in London's shadows and ended in St. Mary Mead's quiet lanes. The silence, she thought, had spoken at last, and she, with her quiet persistence, had listened. Chapter 9. The village restored. The sun rose over St. Mary Mead with a gentle clarity, its rays piercing the morning mist to bathe the village in a golden glow. The cobblestone lanes, lined with cottages whose gardens still clung to the last of the autumn blooms, seemed to exhale a collective sigh, as if the village itself were settling back into its familiar rhythms. Miss Jane Marple sat in her drawing room, her knitting needles moving with their usual soft cadence. The Wedgwood teacup on the table beside her catching the light with its delicate roses. The events of the past week, the missing silver teapot, the shattered library window, the cryptic note in the alms box, the miniature portrait, the love letters, the diamond, and the gunshot in the churchyard had shaken the village's tranquility. But now, with the truth laid bare, St. Mary Mead was knitting itself back together, much like the grey shawl taking shape in her hands. The revelations in Dr. Haydock's surgery had unravelled. The mystery that had gripped the village. Mr. Lawrence Redding, the charming painter whose arrival at the Grange had sparked suspicion, had confessed to his role in concealing a stolen diamond, a relic of a decade-old heist orchestrated by Arthur Grayson, the financier linked to Margaret Clement's tragic death. The diamond, hidden in a tin beneath the churchyard soil, had been the treasure hidden in silence mentioned in Margaret's letters, a secret that had cost her life and haunted reading ever since. Grayson, living under the alias Mr. Harrow, had tracked Redding to St. Mary Mead, his desperation to reclaim the diamond culminating in the gunshot that had wounded the painter. Sir Henry Clithering's search of Grayson's cottage had uncovered a rifle and incriminating papers, sealing his fate. Reading, though guilty of concealing stolen property, had been driven by remorse. His love for Margaret, a wound that had never healed. As Miss Marple sipped her tea, her thoughts turned to the village's restoration. Constable Pock, bolstered by Sir Henry's authority, had taken Grayson into custody, and the diamond was now in the hands of Scotland Yard, its origins traced to a notorious heist that had shaken London's elite a decade earlier. The silver teapot, polished to its former glory, had been returned to Mrs. Eleanor Bantry, who declared it the most thrilling adventure the Grange had ever seen. The love letters, with their poignant words of Margaret's forbidden romance, had been given to Mrs. Clement, who found solace in knowing her sister's name was cleared of scandal. The portrait, with its haunting inscription, remained with Reading, a bittersweet reminder of a past he could not escape. Miss Marple's morning walk took her past the vicarage, where Mrs. Clement was tending her chrysanthemums, her face brighter than it had been in days. "Jane," she called, waving her over, "I can't thank you enough. Knowing Margaret's story, her love, her courage, it's given me peace. I've put her letters in a keepsake box to remember her properly. Miss Marple smiled, her eyes gentle. Memories, Griselda, are like tea leaves. They settle, but they never truly fade. I'm glad you have hers to cherish. At the Grange, Mrs. Bantry was in high spirits, regaling visitors with tales of the Diamond Affair as if it were a novel she had penned herself. "Jane, you're a marvel," she said, pouring tea from the restored teapot. "I'd have never guessed that wretched painter was hiding such a secret, and Grayson living right under our noses. It's positively thrilling." Miss Marple chuckled, accepting a cup. "Thrilling, perhaps, but I prefer the quiet, Eleanor. Villages, you know, are like teacups, simple on the surface, but full of stories if you look closely." The churchyard, once the scene of Redding's desperate errand, was peaceful again. Its gravestones silent under the yew tree's shade. Miss Marple paused there on her way home, her eyes lingering on Mrs. Hartley's grave, where the teapot and diamond had been hidden. She recalled a case from her youth when a stolen brooch, buried in a garden, had revealed a family's betrayal. The churchyard, she thought, was a fitting place for secrets, its silence a canvas for truths too heavy to bear in the light. Back in her cottage, Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting resumed, the grey shawl growing steadily under her deft fingers. The village had returned to its rhythms. The baker's boy cycled with his basket of loaves. Mrs. Price swept her steps with renewed chatter, and the church bells tolled with their familiar cadence. Yet Miss Marple knew that St. Mary Mead, like all villages, would never be entirely free of shadows. Human nature, with its tangle of love, greed, and remorse, ensured that new mysteries would always simmer beneath the surface. As she sipped her tea, the Wedgwood teacup warm in her hands, Miss Marple's eyes drifted to the window, where the village lay bathed in the soft light of dusk. The silence beneath the teacup had spoken, revealing a tale of loss and redemption. And she, with her quiet persistence, had listened. The truth, like the roses on her cup, was fragile yet enduring, a reminder that even in the quietest places, the human heart beat with secrets waiting to be uncovered. The end.